Hey, good afternoon, all. It is October 1st, the bewitching month, the month of my birthday, as a matter of fact, getting towards the end of it. And it's nearly 2 p.m. my time. Beautiful fall day where I am. I hope it's okay in your neck of the woods. Prayers, and hopefully, a lot of the folks that are tuning in from Florida. Jesus, the devastation of Hurricane Ian looked unbelievable. I still can't believe some of the sights and stories that I've heard over the course of the last week. So my thoughts and prayers are with you, and hopefully many in our audience as well. I think the place I want to start at the moment is kind of the absurdity again of really the way social media plays out. So yesterday, I was taking a look at some of the comments, and you know, true to form, and I'd say not unexpectedly, people that are Trump supporters are really looking to somehow isolate me as a threat of some sort, and obviously someone to target, I would imagine. Fine, whatever, bring it. Yeah, I've got nothing to hide. I can't stand Trump. I can't stand what created Trump that enabled us to be in the position that we're in, that I continue to try to enlighten you. Now, for the rest of you, um, I hope that you're able to get through just the front door of what opens up this incredible universe of corruption that I've been revealing to you for some time. I've got over 30 hours, probably hundreds of hours here on TikTok. I would encourage you all to go to Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con on YouTube, and please like and subscribe. Got to create some sort of tidal wave of interest there to break through the algorithms, because I'm holding the largest revelation of the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that created the situation we're in. And it's unacceptable. I started with Trump, and I think that the first thing I want to go back to with regards to that, because so many of you are um, really interested in that subject. We've had threats in the past, not so much threats, but people are like, yeah, I was with you until I found out you hated Trump. Well, if you're not a Nazi, or if you're not a Confederate, which both I hate, probably at the apex of everything, just right next to the corrupt bastards that I'll get to in a minute. But yeah, Trump's been up to his eyeballs in all sorts of fucking crazy shit going back to the 80s. The guy was born on third base with a silver spoon. Daddy Warbucks left him about 600 million, I think, maybe more than that. And he got into a racketeering enterprise from the very beginning. He'd been stiffing his, people, working on his towers and skirting all sorts of laws and working with the mob going back to the 70s. In the 80s, he got it on overdrive. And since then, the guy's been working with, autocrats around the world and just getting money wherever he could find it. And a lot of the times, the easiest way to do that is to launder money through real estate. And, a lot of that could come from really bad actors, particularly our enemies, which brings it full circle. I mean, the stuff that Trump's been involved with for decades has been criminal. The fact that he was able to rise to the level of presidency is absolute insanity. And if you don't understand that, you got to wrap your head around this. There's many of you that'll never get there, and that's fine. But for the rest of you who don't really understand things, you don't know much about politics and how the country's supposed to operate and what the law actually means in power. But as much as Trump was a mob boss his entire career, he was able to kind of keep it on the outside. Like, he was literally involved with some of the biggest mob families in New York, right? But he kept kind of a distance, and he kind of kept his hands somewhat clean. He wasn't doing the dirty work like Sammy the Bull and all these like real, head crackers and murderers and thugs and guys that, many wound up in prison or dead. But, the foot soldiers, the consigliaries, those guys that operate in the mob, we're basically working around, the unions and concrete and, certain levels of what gets built in Manhattan and all of those sorts of things that they had a lot of interest in. And I don't think you could ever come anywhere near that island, particularly coming out of the 70s and all of the craziness that happened in that era, without getting involved with that. And Trump navigated it. He was a business guy. Guy uses media the whole time. And he ends up climbing into a whole bunch of different scenarios that he ended up involved with, like racketeering and junk bonds and, stuff during the SNL crisis. that led him to several bankruptcies, and then he got into predatory lending, and then he got involved with Trump University, where he had to pay a $25 million fine. The list goes on and on and on. And the stuff, in fact, one reader was like, oh yeah, laughing, like I didn't read the indictment from Letitia James and the AG of New York. Oh, I read it, and boy, did I read it several times. And what's really amazing to me is really most of the stuff that comes out of those complaints, that indictment, could lead to both civil and criminal convictions of Donald Trump that could send him to jail and literally bankrupt the guy, even though he's been in bankrupt several times, but this time maybe for good. Are all in those complaints, both civil and with criminal referrals, both to the Southern District DA of Manhattan, and also, of course, the Department of Justice. But as much as he might have been involved with the mob, right? And a lot of those guys can be dangerous, and they can knock you off, and they can be really threatening and scary, and whatever the fuck, really, 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 really mean, dirty, fucking nasty individuals that get shit done the way they want to do it. Crackheads fucking drop people off in the rivers, and concrete shoes and all that stuff. It's been around my entire lifetime. It's been around much longer than I've been involved with, and so on and so forth. But that mob, literally, is tiny in comparison to the pinstripe mob that has complete control, and which is the ultimate revelation of corruption that controls the United States, okay? And quite frankly, the world. Now, this elitist Ivy League mob might not have a bunch of consigliaries working for them that, aren't very bright, but know how to certainly threaten and do any manner of crimes, including violence. Those are small level players, quite frankly, in comparison to if you're in control of what might be not just, the United States military, which is the largest military in the history of the fucking world, that could nuke, any country to Armageddon 10 times over, 100 times over, 1,000 times over, not to mention everything else that we have in our armaments, but the CIA and the FBI and then, police all over the country. Let me tell you, if that shit's corrupt, that puts the mob to fucking shame, okay? Now, it's not a direct corollary, like, you don't have, like, Guido or some Vinny the Boss and, like real life guys, the Gottis, giving the directions here. What we have is what are called CEOs of large financial institutions. And they operate with a control scheme, which is control fraud, which is racketeering in the long run. There's a lot of variations of it, but a lot of it is on display in Trump's indictment. But when you want to get behind the curtain, and I've done this over and over and over, but I've got to repeat it because it's just extraordinary that millions of you do not understand this. And I am desperately trying to get your attention because the patriots have got to rise up. Because the notion of the United States is liberty and justice for all, built on separation of powers, built on the integrity of law, built on everything that this country is supposed to be. That is the antithesis, the opposite, the inverse of, the right of kings. But what we've done in the pinstripe media is the guy who's the ultimate mob boss is Larry Fink, the guy who runs CEO of BlackRock. They literally have their fingers in almost everything the United States is involved with, and they're probably the most powerful asset manager, corporation, whatever you want to call them, on the entire planet. So, in comparison, where we got to was made possible by what the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, did in 2009 as a result of the criminal pipeline. That's the largest freaking engineered insanity in the history of the world that had this veneer that it was legit, and it was setting up tens of millions of people to fail because of the way the contracts were worked and liar's loans and different things that borrowers didn't understand. I mean, in the 2008 great financial crisis, or what led up to it, you could literally have somebody, for example, who was a tomato picker in California. They got loans for like $700,000 houses with overlooking the ocean, okay? In what world is that possible? Well, in the world that I'm describing to you. In addition to that, there were regular people that had jobs their whole lives that kind of got stagnant, and then they, got an opportunity to refinance their home because they wanted a partition, or they wanted to buy an ATV, or they wanted to go on vacation, or they had to pay for, medication that they couldn't afford because they didn't have enough money. And so they used their houses to refinance to get more money. Okay. But they did so based on this element of what's in the con. That also plays out in all of these different indictments to Donald Trump, primarily with appraisal fraud and hyperinflation of assets. There's a methodology to it. Once again, it's called control fraud. And it's all in the con. And it's at the www.thecon.tv website. If you go to the videos and you pull down the pull down menu, and you can just take a look at all of the videos, the microdocs that we put there for free, it'll give you a very good sense of how this entire apparatus works and for whom. So we're in this situation where everybody is literally just down here at the base level, okay? It's like this red versus blue. What team are you on? But people who don't understand the country they live in. And they don't understand what happened over the course of the last 13 years. And you might ask yourself, look, there's just no way in hell that any of this is possible. Like, let's just say you're an 18-year-old kid and you followed the rules your whole life and you want to go to college and you're just hearing from me for the first time and you're asking yourself, well, look, I know that my mom and dad had some problems, but my dad drank too much and maybe he didn't pay his bills and they got, thrown out in the streets, which destroyed my life. And I decided I'm going to do better. So I went to college, got a scholarship, and I'm going to come out the other side and I'm going to win at this ball game. Well, first of all, good for you if you're somebody of that incredible achievement, but you're still walking into a scenario that none of us can hide from. Starting in 2009, the Federal Reserve did something it's never done before in its history. It provided immense liquidity through this, what we call an alphabet soup of lender of last resort loans to bankrupt financial institutions that were shadow banks that were not covered in the statutes for anything resembling how we do loans in this country, because everything in a debt-based society has to be built on collateral. If you go get a loan, quite frankly, you should be, in like the old days, be able to put down 20%, have X amount of time in a job, be able to prove you paid your taxes, and that you're a good credit risk and you're a certain level of credit risk, right? And then you can determine what kind of loans you can get under what circumstances and what kind of products that they were offering. And eventually, we wound up with this misnomer called subprime loans. There's a real reason why people used to loan for subprime lenders at higher yield, more risk. Okay, if you're in finance and you're doing loans, you have to price in risk. Okay, there's the collateral that you're loaning against that has to be a specific value within the formulation, but you also have to know the borrower and you have to do the proper underwriting. And so if somebody had proved themselves worthy of loans that get loans and they get into these situations, they were fantastic credit risk. And that's what the entire mortgage-backed security scenario was banking on in about 2000, let's call it 1999 through 2001, when $70 trillion of investment capital from overseas, because we shopped out the golden goose that led to middle classes all around the world that wanted to invest in the United States because we were thought of as pretty much AAA. In fact, not thought of, we were guaranteed AAA because of all the stopgaps that we have in the system that everybody thought was honest. And if you understand currency, if you understand, anything to do with the economy, much of it is based on faith that these stopgaps work. And that's why this whole thing is so confusing and so cloudy and murky and so difficult to understand for so many people, because like me, it's just the opposite of what you grew up, A, believing we were, and B, playing by the rules so that you couldn't think that any of this was possible. But the only way that this happens is through absolute corruption. Because of the size and the scope of what took place and the calamity that led to the housing collapse, and again, this is off the other bubbles that happened before. In about 2003, 2004, we had what was known as the Enron era frauds. That was also WorldCom and Tyco. Those were huge, right? And those actually created during the Bush administration a new law called Sarbanes-Oxley that was going to hold the boards, the CEOs, and the boards responsible for deception. But as we found out in the 2008 great financial crisis, let's not look what we don't want to find. But before that, we had in 2000 we had the tech bubble, and before that we had a run on currencies in 1998, and Japan blew up at about that time, And a lot of this financial engineering and innovation has happened because we farmed out what we call, through neoliberalism, supply chains. You've heard that recently because many people were saying, well, because of supply chains, that's what's happening to cause inflation, and it is to a certain extent. How much, I'm not exactly sure, but when you compare that, I'm sure quite a bit, quite frankly. But when you compare that and whatever happened in the supply chains because of COVID and everything else, you got to understand that we put trillions upon trillions of dollars into the financial system, and then we bought their assets through the Federal Reserve that could be made up of nothing. For example, in the housing collapse, we provided liar's loans, which were known as ninja loans. And they were a vast majority of loans between 2004 and 2007. What ninja loans meant was no income, no asset. You didn't have to have any money, that you could just make up whatever you wanted. And they would give you these loans. That's how much of an appetite there were, because the brokers were getting paid to get as many loans in the pipeline as possible, that underwriters were getting paid on how many loans that they approved, because the lenders needed to get those loans because they were providing warehouse lines to be able to get these loans as quickly as possible to sell on the open market. That Wall Street was also creating these financial derivatives, which included collateralized debt obligations and credit default swaps and a whole menagerie of smoke and mirrors to make it look like this whole thing was legit. Meanwhile, things were so crazy that the CEO of AIG products, like Joe Cassano, was literally selling insurance on products that was just going into his bonus. They never kept the insurance in the levers, because when shit hit the fan, the first in line to get paid out was none other than Goldman Sachs. And then that's what created the whole run in the repo markets in 2007 that led to this disaster that took place in 2008. And when people start to think, for example, okay, you're hyper-targeting Trump. Trump was just a part of this stuff the whole time. He just played his role in it, okay? Which, again, I keep reminding you, was a mid-level player at best. But at the same time, during this time period that led to, the collapse, nobody had ever done what Ben Bernanke, then federal chairman of the chairman of the Federal Reserve, alongside Hank Paulson, who was the Treasury Secretary, who came out of Goldman Sachs. Then he became the Treasury Secretary under Bush. And Bush, of course, was fueling this thing like crazy because his biggest contributors happened to be the biggest players in this market. So, which led them to make sure that the FBI didn't get up the skirt of the fraud. And they kicked it kicked the can down the road until it blew up on the world. And in that time period, right between when Bush left and when Obama came in, that's when they made the deal to be able to pull out, in Hank Paulson's words, the bazooka that provided trillions of dollars to the financial industry and made the American people foam on the runway for the crashing banks. And what they did was they basically looted the Federal Reserve with the actual direction of the Federal Reserve to create trillions of dollars of liquidity for bankrupt institutions that got there through fraud, criminal racketeering, and everything else. And all of the lies and deception that went into that entire system got spit out with the same lies and deception, with the same documentation fabrication that came out through the courts that buried millions of people illegally because they couldn't prove standing. But it didn't matter, because the judges, just like the goddamn mortgage brokers or the appraisers or the underwriters, were getting paid approve the foreclosure. I shit you not. That's what happened to our judicial system. Judges who have salaries for life and nobody can really look over their shoulder. It's very difficult to challenge a judge unless you vote them out. But if you've got a lot of money backing them, they're there forever. And they were there literally handpicked to ignore the evidence so that they could bury millions of people, so that the fraudsters that blew up the world could get all the collateral back, and then they recycled it, okay? And that was one part of it. And that was in 2009. Okay, the aftermath went from 2009 to basically 2016, I think, is when it started to kind of crest down, and then it started to pick back up again because we had a national mortgage settlement, $25 billion settlement that was supposed to stop all this stuff, but it didn't. The servicers and the foreclosure mills, they were all in on it, and they were getting paid by the damn Federal Reserve's quantitative easing. So what the Federal Reserve did was, at first in 2009, they provided trillions of dollars of liquidity to bankrupt fraudulent institutions that put money in the pockets of the crooks. And what do you think what's going to happen when you do that? They're going to do it over and over and over, which they had. And then on top of it, not only did they give them the free money to get into the whole system, to create the more debt and everything else, that they start creating more and more high yield, which takes us back to junk bonds and takes me back, quite frankly, in my analysis of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's been involved with this type of stuff going back to way before New Jersey and the Taj Mahal and all of the stuff that happened at that time. But that time's very clearly involved with junk bonds. And he stiffed all of his workers, and he ran away with the loot, and ultimately went bankrupt 6 times, right? Something along those lines, which he says is, he says with like a grin on his face, like, hey, he's a great guy because he knows how to fuck everybody. He's been doing it forever, and he keeps walking through the raindrops. I think his time is coming to an end, but as a result of all of this stuff, now he's out there with all of these people that are thinking he's getting the wrong end of the deal, that he's the salvation to the system, which is amazing. But we've had a long parade throughout the history of the United States of carnival barkers and snake oil salesmen and people that lead people to their demise. And usually, in the notion of capitalism, for example, right, you're supposed to have risk reward. If you get wiped out, if you invest in all of this kind of stuff that leads to stuff that's going to blow up, you go down with the ship. But instead, the Federal Reserve provided trillions of liquidity to the people that blew it up, and then they salvaged everybody that was in that matrix, right? They basically pacified the top 10% over the course of the last 13 years, but they really propped up the top 1%, which again takes me back to the notion of the right of the rights of kings. Anyway, it eludes me at the moment, but you get the concept. It's not complicated. All of this stuff is just like engineering and pipeline and everything else. And if you sabotage it and you blow it up, you should pay the price of that. Most of us, I mean, when you go to the movie theater, are you rooting for the bad guys? I said this a long time ago. It just seems to me that the only way that any of this makes sense is everybody was rooting for the Empire and Darth Vader. It really is the only way it makes sense to me, right? Because I don't think that the United States is that. I think the United States is always on the side of good, right? And that will step up to evil because it's the courageous thing to do. And we're a nation, presumably, at least I thought so until all of this stuff went down, of courageous people with integrity. But of course, this many years later, obviously, it looks like we're about to take a big freaking smash, another faceplant, because I'm pretty sure, unless, I think it could go one of two ways. Given what's been going on in the markets the last couple of weeks, we're right on the edge of another literally calamitous global collapse, which could lead to a Great Depression. In that case, everybody goes down. But I have a feeling what's going to happen is they're going to let it go long enough just to crash people in their jobs, to create as much unemployment as possible, to presumably get rid of inflation. But at the same time, then they'll prop up the 1% again with quantitative easing, just like England did with the Bank of England buying all the bonds the other day, which is quantitative easing. That's the government in this particular case, and this gets a little bit murky, not a little bit, but really murky. So how many of you out there think that the Federal Reserve is a piece of the United States government that's actually accountable to Congress, or B, independent? Well, the answer is supposed to be A, but it's actually B. And the reason it's B is because of everything I'm telling you. They never came to the American people, and they never said in 2008. In fact, I remember this so clearly, and this is the reason why I had to make the con, is I remember seeing Barack Obama give all of these eloquent speeches about, I'm the only thing standing between the bankers and the pitchforks, and then, we're going to be able to modify all these loans, and we're creating this thing called HAMP, and then I'm not seeing it on the front lines, and then everything seemed to be kind of like just this mass deception. And again, especially because I was dealing with servicers and foreclosure mills at that time period, and I knew it was fucking nuts. It was driving me nuts. And so one thing led to another, and the miracle was that we went on this grand journey that took over a decade to put all of the pieces together. That is the investigation that the country covered up. The DOJ covered it up. They didn't investigate. Lanny Breuer and Eric Holder, who worked during the Obama administration, came out of a company called Covington and Burling. Covington and Burling is a big, big white shoe law firm that all of their clients were all of the Wall Street clientele, all of the big financial system. So you have Eric Holder revolving right out of his corner office at Covington and Burling, right into the AG's department, director of AG of the Obama administration, and he and Lanny Breuer completely betrayed the United States. They completely betrayed the rule of law. So for all your Trumpers out there that are cringing and going, God damn it, Patrick, I don't want to hear any of this stuff about Trump. Well, first of all, you're going to, because Trump is as corrupt as they get, and he's creating a situation where people can, without any fear, go out in the streets and go Zeke fucking Heil. First of all, fuck Nazis and fuck the enemy of freedom and liberty and justice for all. That's what patriots should say. But he only got to this position because of the failure of everything that preceded him. In fact, I've been saying that corruption births fascism. That's the story. And there's no turning back. I have to penetrate the world, the obfuscation, the people who've put their head in the sand, the people who want to blame everybody. I've got to reach them and you to prove to you so you can finally have the light turn on in your mind and go, oh my God, they've been playing us the whole time. And they've been playing us for the 1%. The bottom line is, people, you cannot expect there to be law and order and the integrity of law for everybody below the line and complete lawlessness up above the line, to where guys like Larry Fink, who literally control everything, can make the shots and you never voted for him. You don't even know who he is. You don't even know what his history is. You don't even know what he was involved with Maiden Lane through everything that constituted QE and what his influence is. But I can tell you, anybody who has parents, for example, that were able to, have great salaries growing up because they had good jobs and they bought houses and they stayed in them for a long time and they were able to get into a bigger house and they had, equity and they were able to save over the course of years and kind of withstand the ups and downs. They basically got a lot of, this huge increase in their portfolio, whether it was their houses or their stocks. And when you're in retirement, that's all you really care about, right? But how about for the rest of us? How about for the rest of us who got flushed down the toilet so that the bad guys who stole the American dream, who murdered the American dream, who raped the American dream and kicked it into a fucking trash can, are smiling on in our face every single day, and nobody knows what's going on. Again, if you listen to Rachel Maddow, she's not talking about this stuff. If you listen to Tucker Carlson, you can actually go find stuff from Tucker Carlson on private equity that's really good. But he's not talking about this stuff because that's not his job. Anderson Cooper, I always make fun of him thinking about him being the Zoolander look, right? But at the end of the day, I think that he actually had a stint in the CIA, but he's a Vanderbilt, and then he's like this top guy that basically asks these rhetorical questions, and nobody knows what the hell's going on because they have this this idea that everybody gets a chance to, make their case, and it's like, okay, well, where's the truth? The truth is in the facts. That you got to understand how it works, and you got to understand how crime works, and you got to understand, what's legal, what's not. And I think we all know that thievery is illegal and wrong. How many of you would go and take out somebody you saw steal a purse from an elderly woman? I bet you most of us would, regardless of our political ideology. Why are you sitting on your hands, pointing the fingers and telling people like me, oh, you just hate Trump and that's all there is to it? No, that's one piece of a much bigger picture that I continue to paint for you. And it's not just my words. My God, I went to the ends of the earth and back to create The Con at www.thecon.tv. It's the investigation that never took place that proves the Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally to bail out the largest criminal racket in the history of the world, and that's your reality. And if you don't come out of it and you don't get in the game and you don't understand, this thing can get even worse if that's even possible. At least worse for everybody except for the very highest in society that, enjoy the right, the infinite right of kings because they own the system. And that's not the United States of America. Remember, Larry Fink and BlackRock's not on the ballot, but they run the ballot, okay? Patrick Lovell is not on the ballot, but I'm certainly trying to overwhelm the corruption. Please join me. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. Please watch The Con. Please share this like your life depends on it. It does.